All right, ready to dive in. Today, it's the Vietnam War we're tackling. But we're going deeper than the headlines, Really trying to grasp what fueled this thing, what it meant in the grand scheme of things. I mean, think about it. This small nation, Vietnam, in Southeast Asia, somehow becomes a pivotal point in global conflict.
It's wild how a conflict seemingly so far away ended up shaping global politics. You've got colonialism, revolution, international relations. It's all tangled up, even impacting us today.
And that's what we're unpacking, right? Using these excerpts, Asian nationalism, to guide us. So picture this. Vietnam, centuries of rich culture, suddenly under French control for decades.
Yeah. The French, they had their reasons, or so they thought. Vietnam was fertile ground, perfect for rice, rubber, all that. Big population, too, guaranteed buyers for their goods. And strategically, those harbors were gold mines for controlling the region.
Can't forget the whole cultural aspect either, right? It's in the source material. They wanted to spread their culture, make Vietnam more European, even if it meant pushing aside existing traditions. Kind of like someone waltzing into your house and rearranging all your furniture because they like it better. The Vietnamese were pressured to learn French. Newspapers were all in French. Even the architecture started looking European. This wasn't just about resources. It was about reshaping an entire society.
It's textbook colonialism, and it almost always backfires.
Yeah.
That kind of cultural steamrolling just breeds resentment. You're squashing the identity of the people you're trying to control, and that's the breeding ground for someone like Ho Chi Minh to emerge.
Talk about an interesting figure. This guy, originally in Nguyen Tat Thanh, works his way over to France as a cook on a ship. Can you imagine? Surrounded by the clamor of the kitchen, yet observing life in the West, absorbing it all, that's when he encounters communist ideology. Talk about a life-changing experience.
And this is key, right? Communism back then, it was all about a classless society, everyone sharing the means of production. The U.S., during the Cold War, they saw red. Communism was dangerous, a threat to their way of life, so they opposed it, sometimes at any cost.
It's crazy how a seemingly random experience like that, working on a ship, can end up shaping history. I mean, the future leader of Vietnam, learning about the West while cooking up meals. Talk about an unconventional education.
Then boom, World War II throws everything for a loop. Japan occupies Vietnam, pouring fuel on those already burning nationalist flames. When Japan's defeated, it's like this open invitation. Ho Chi Minh, he seizes the moment, declares Vietnamese independence in 45. But it's never that easy, is it?
Enter Cold War tensions. The U.S., already on edge about communism, sees a communist Vietnam as their worst nightmare. Our source even quotes Eisenhower's domino theory, remember that? The idea that if one Southeast Asian nation fell to communism, the rest would follow, like dominoes. It's this fear that comes to dominate U.S. foreign policy.
Leading us right to the Geneva Accords in 54. It's supposed to be a peace treaty, but in reality, it just planted the seeds for more conflict. They divided Vietnam in two, North and South, with elections planned to reunify later. Problem is, the U.S., terrified of a communist win, backs Ngo Dinh Diem when he refuses to hold those elections. They essentially chose a divided Vietnam over a potentially unified communist one.
So now you've got Ho Chi Minh in the north, establishing his communist state, and down south there's Ngo Dinh Diem, staunchly anti-communist, taking charge. And this is where things get interesting, because Diem, even with the U.S. on his side, wasn't exactly Mr. Popular, was he? It's kind of shocking what's in this source. Corrupt regime, they call it. Favoring Catholics over the Buddhist majority. Even banned Buddhist holidays. Can you imagine the uproar?
It's a textbook case of what not to do as a leader. Diem basically alienated a huge chunk of South Vietnam, made them ready to rebel, almost guaranteed it.
Prime opportunity for the Viet Cong to step in, right? Guerrilla fighters, fighting for, in their minds, a unified Vietnam under communist rule. Better death than slavery, that was their motto. Powerful stuff.
And they lived by it. That's what's striking. They were ready to die for that vision of Vietnam free from outside influence, unified. And their tactics. Genius, really. Guerrilla warfare, using the terrain, the jungles, the rice paddies, against a superpower, no less. Imagine having that level of dedication.
It's David versus Goliath, except David's got some serious skills, and he's embedded in the very society Goliath's trying to control.
Exactly. The U.S. had no idea what they were truly up against. And that's how this whole thing spirals. First, it's advisors, a helping hand. Next thing you know is hundreds of thousands of troops stuck in a quagmire trying to save a government that's, well, not so popular to begin with. They were hoping for a clean victory, something quick. But then comes 68, the Tet Offensive.
Oh man, the Tet Offensive. A turning point for sure. That coordinated surprise attack during the Vietnamese New Year, right?
Yep. Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces, they hit all these targets in South Vietnam at once. Even the U.S. Embassy in Saigon wasn't safe. Imagine the shockwaves, right?
Uh,
These guys managed to pull off such a massive operation, even held the embassy for a bit. The U.S. public, they'd never seen anything like it.
Tactically, it was a loss for the North, but strategically, huge win. It showed everyone, especially back in the U.S., that this wasn't going to be an easy fight. Public opinion, it flipped.
The Tet Offensive, it ripped off the Band-Aid, exposed the truth. This war, it was a stalemate. The U.S. was stuck, fighting an enemy far more resilient, far more determined than they ever imagined.
And that realization that this wasn't a winnable situation, that's when things get really complicated. The U.S., trying to salvage something, anything, ends up using some tactics that, well, people still argue about them today.
It's the dark side of war, isn't it? The moral lines start to blur. Our source, it doesn't shy away from it. Agent Orange, napalm, these were tools in the U.S. arsenal.
Tough to even think about. The logic, at least on paper, was to deprive the Viet Cong of cover, disrupt their supplies. But the reality, devastating. The impact on the Vietnamese people, their environment, it was devastating and long-lasting.
The images, they're seared into our collective memory. Scorched earth, villages wiped out, children especially bearing the brunt of Agent Orange's effects. It's a grim legacy, a reminder of the true cost of war.
And those images, they weren't hidden away. The whole world saw them. I argue that's what really turned the tide of public opinion, both in the U.S. and globally.
Absolutely. How do you justify that level of suffering, especially when the conflict seems endless? The anti-war movement, it exploded. Suddenly, the U.S. government was under immense pressure to find a way out, any way out.
Which takes us to the inevitable, really. U.S. withdrawal, the fall of Saigon. A moment etched in history. Our source, it describes the chaos, the city, soon to be renamed Ho Chi Minh City, falling to the North Vietnamese. It must have been, I don't even know. Just unimaginable to live through that.
It was the end of an era, a brutal chapter in Vietnamese history, for sure, but it also signals something else, a shift in global power. The realization that the U.S. could engage in a conflict and not necessarily achieve its objectives. It was unprecedented.
It's like the Vietnam War forced America to take a long, hard look in the mirror. Time to rethink foreign policy, the limits of military power. And maybe, just maybe, a deeper understanding of the regions and cultures they were getting involved in.
Right on. And for Vietnam, the war left these deep wounds, physical and emotional. The nation was divided, broken. But, and this is crucial, it's also a story of resilience. They found a way to bounce back.
Rebuilt, reunified, right?
Exactly. Since the war, Vietnam has made this incredible comeback. Their economy is thriving. It's a testament to the human spirit, the ability to recover, rebuild, even after such immense hardship. It's pretty amazing.
Almost like you can't keep the human spirit down forever. There's something hopeful about that. And you know what else our source mentions? War tourism. People today, they visit these places, these battlefields, these reminders of a painful past. It's a bit ironic, but maybe it's also a path towards healing, towards understanding.
It reminds us that history, it's messy, complex, full of different perspectives, motivations, intended and unintended consequences. And sometimes those consequences, they ripple outward, far beyond what anyone could have imagined.
That's the beauty of these deep dives, you know? We get to unpack these layers of history, find those aha moments that change how we view the world. And this exploration of the Vietnam War, it leaves me thinking about the domino theory we discussed. Knowing what we know now, how differently might U.S. foreign policy have unfolded if they'd chosen a different path, if they hadn't intervened in Vietnam? It's something to ponder for sure, because the echoes of this conflict, they're still felt today. And to our listeners, if this sparked your curiosity, don't let it end here. Dig into the sources we use, keep asking questions, keep learning. There's a whole world of knowledge out there.
I couldn't have said it better myself. History is filled with stories within stories, waiting to be discovered. The more we understand the past, the better equipped we are to navigate the present and maybe, just maybe, create a better future.